Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Welcome back to the YouTube channel of Multan Public School and College for Girls in your Cambridge Biology 5090 lecture number 4. In today's lecture, we will study about chapter 18, Ecology. Before getting into the main concepts of the chapter, let me share the learning objectives. By the end of this video, you should be able to define ecology, ecosystem, species and other important definitions. You should be then able to state biotic and abiotic environment, and then state the sun is the principal source of energy input to the biological systems. Also describe the non-cyclic nature of energy flow. Let's first study ecology. Ecology is the study of interactions among organisms and between organisms and the physical and chemical factors making up their external environment. A good example of an ecosystem is provided by a forest. It may be a mangrove forest, it may be a tropical rainforest. The forest contains trees, smaller plants, birds, animals, and soil microorganisms, together with the non-living components of the soil such as rock particles, organic remains, and inorganic salts. Similarly, a pond ecosystem is also considered to be a complete ecosystem because all the things which are present inside, all the animals, the plants, and the sunlight along, they work together to form a balanced yet constantly changing unit of nature. So to keep such systems in equilibrium, energy is required. This energy is only provided directly or indirectly by the sun. Now if we consider a single tree, for example an oak tree, if it is considered as an ecosystem in which each zone of the tree is a habitat for a distinct community of organisms. Now what is habitat? Habitat is a place of an organism where it lives. For example, the root and the litter zone contains bacteria, earthworms, woodlice and fungi. In the same way, the trunk is the habitat for insects and their larvae. The branches and the leaves of a tree, they may be the habitat of bees, wasps, moths, squirrels and hawks, etc. Now let's consider the main definition in ecosystem, which is the species. What is species? A species is a group of organisms that can interbreed to produce fertile offsprings. For example, a horse and a donkey, they both belong to different species, but they can interbreed with one another and produce an offspring, a mule, which is unable to reproduce because they are infertile. This fact shows that the mule which cannot reproduce shows that horses and donkeys belong to two different species. Now let's see some important ecological terms. A habitat is a place where an organism lives. For example, water is the habitat of fish. That is, the fish may be present in the fresh water like river. It may be in marine water like any ocean, any sea. Now another definition is population. A population is a group of organisms of the same species living in a defined area. For example, like all human beings, we belong to the same species. Now if there are 20 students in a class, we say that the population of that class is 20 according to biology. Okay, similarly, if you see a ground in your school in which different types of trees are growing, let's understand by taking an example that if there are 10 trees of group A and 20 trees of group B, then we say that the population of group A is 10 and population of group B plants is 20. Now let's consider community. A community is made up of all the populations of plants, animals and microorganisms living and interacting in a given habitat. For example, if we see your class, then not only human beings, which is a population, but there may be some mosquitoes, there may be some lizards, there may be bacteria or viruses. So they all constitute a community. Biodiversity is the degree of variation that exists among all living organisms on Earth. If we see that animals and plants which are present in Asia, they are quite different from Europe and quite different from America and Canada and so on. So when we examine the biodiversity on Earth, it is useful to consider the populations of organisms in a species, because these can fluctuate in an ecosystem depending on certain factors. For example, there may be competition between organisms for resources. It may depend on the predator numbers. It may also depend on the disease if organisms have suffered from that. All living organisms within an ecosystem are interdependent. That is, they are depending on each other. A change in the size of one population affects all the other organisms within the ecosystem. This is shown particularly clearly by the relationship between predator and prey population. We know that the abiotic and the biotic factors, they both constitute an ecosystem. The biotic factors are the living factors in an organism environment. For example, animals, plants, bacteria, virus, and other decomposers. Abiotic factors, which are the non-living factors in an organism's environment. For example, the temperature, air, water, light, soil, and the pH, either of the water or of the soil. Organisms are adapted to surviving in their particular natural environment. Now, if they move from one particular place to another, or between different biotic and abiotic factors, they might die because they cannot adjust very quickly. Like if the fish, which is freshwater fish, if it moves down to the ocean, it will not be able to survive in the marine environment, and vice versa. Now let's see certain more abiotic factors. For example, air, which is a mixture of oxygen, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and other gases. Another abiotic factor is water, light, wind, soil, pH, temperature, salinity, humidity, inorganic nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus. In the biotic factors that influence ecosystem, all the living organisms, that is animals, plants, and microorganisms are there, but their certain influences on each other, they are also very much important. For example, competition between organisms, their predator-prey relationship, which is known as predation, symbiosis, which is like mutualism and parasitism, and disease causing agents. So dear students, what are you understanding from this particular slide? Are you getting anything? Temperature is measured by thermometer or certain probes. So why importance of temperature is there in an ecosystem? Because enzyme activity is heavily affected by heat, and therefore the metabolism of organism is affected. Similarly, the solubility of oxygen in water is also dependent on temperature. When we increase the temperature, or if the temperature increases, it reduces the solubility of oxygen in water. For that reason, temperature is very much important. Light is measured by a light meter. The influence, the productivity of producers, that is the plants, and therefore the availability of energy in the entire ecosystem is depending on light. pH is measured by pH meter, which may be electronic, or there may be a chemical test which we do in the labs. So the pH measures how acidic or alkaline a solution is. The pH of water is particularly important for aquatic organisms, especially in the case of freshwater organisms, because here the pH may change accordingly depending that how much rainwater is available or how much flow of water is there. Whereas in the case of marine ecosystem, pH normally remains constant. So the low pH, that is acidic pH, interferes with the iron regulation and reduces the efficiency of hemoglobin. So less oxygen will be carried by hemoglobin. So it may have a drastic effect on animals living in a pond ecosystem. Similarly, pH is very important in the soil as well, because different plants they grow very well in different pH. So for this reason, plants sometimes do not grow very well when we buy from nurseries. Light meter used to measure the light intensity is held at the soil surface and pointed in the direction of the maximum light intensity, and then the meter is recorded. Errors can be made when measuring light intensity by accidentally shading the light meter. So the reliability of the results can be checked by taking many samples. Soil moisture and soil pH meters are also available in the market. Both are used by simply pushing the probe into the soil and reading the meter. Errors here can be made when measuring pH and soil moisture while the probes are not clean between two different readings. The reliability of the results can be checked by taking many samples. Similarly, the temperature of the air can be measured with a thermometer, and that of the soil can be measured with a temperature probe. Since air is one of the most important abiotic factor in which different gases are dissolved, like oxygen, carbon dioxide and nitrogen, which are used by different animals and plants, the most common source of air pollution is the combustion of fossil fuels. So this usually happens in vehicle engines and power stations. Sulfur dioxide is released if the fuel contains sulfur compounds. This sulfur compounds gases they contribute to acid rain. So lichens can be used as air pollution indicators, especially of the concentration of sulfur dioxide in the atmosphere. Lichens are organisms that grow in exposed places such as rocks or tree barks. They need to be very efficient at absorbing water and nutrients to grow there. Rainwater contains just enough nutrients to keep them alive. So basically these lichens, they are indicator species, and they are the organism, that is the indicator species are organisms that can tell us about the levels of pollution in an area by their presence or absence. Let's study how the mangrove plant is adapted to the environment in which it is growing. Mangrove trees or mangrove forests, they are growing in estuaries, that is the area between the river bed and the sea. So here in this plant leaves there are salt glands which secrete salt, and they are known as salt excretors. Similarly, the older leaves, they may also accumulate salt in them, and when they fall they take away that salt with them. Since these mangrove plants are growing, sometimes the water level may be high tide, sometimes it may be at low tide. So the prop roots, they descend from the trunk to provide additional support. So in this way the forests and the trees, they are growing very well. There are specialized root membranes in certain mangrove trees which prevent salt from entering their roots. Similarly, cable roots, they radiate from the trunk. So fine feeding roots, they grow off these radial roots and create a stable platform. These cable roots have special openings on them known as nematophores. So these nematophores, they arise from the cable roots. Oxygen diffuses through these spongy tissues to the rest of the plant. Dear students, sit with me to understand how the sun is a main source of energy. Since we all know that from sun we get heat and light, so that energy in the form of light, 19% is absorbed by the water vapor and dust which is present in the atmosphere. So clouds also absorb that energy. Similarly, the ground, that also absorbs nearly 46% of the energy. So that energy is also reflected back. All is not absorbed. Similarly, the clouds, they are also reflecting some of the energy back into the atmosphere. I recommend to watch the video at least 3 times for better understanding. When you find something exciting or have a question, share it with me. Allah Hafiz, stay safe and blessed.